Welcome back to another installment of Panalysis. This is the video series where we look at one particular panel of comics by a different artist in every episode. And by popular demand, in this episode, we're going to be looking at Juan Guardino. He's the artist behind Black Sad. In this episode, change it up a little bit, we're going to be looking at a variety of different Black Sad panels. But before we get into that, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Eon. If you're a comic artist, an illustrator, any kind of visual artist who cares about the quality of the paper that you make your art on, Eon Art Products is the place for you. I've personally been using Eon art boards ever since I heard about them, and they have quickly become my favorite paper out there. They make a variety of different Bristol board papers. This is the vellum finish. They have a smooth finish as well. Also, they have these comic art boards. These are pre-ruled comic art boards. So all the blue line template is already on it, very similar to stuff that a publisher might provide for their artists. Conveniently, if you are a comic book artist, these are pre-cut to 11 by 17, which is sort of the standard size for making comics. I happen to do my illustration work on here as well, commission work. It takes to pencil really well, to inking really well. It could even handle a little bit of a ink wash or some gouache paint. Speaking of ink, they also provide ink as well. Check out their social media. You'll see all the different comic artists and illustrators that use these art boards. Also, they're manufactured in the US, which is always a plus. So if you're interested in checking out Eon Art Products, I will leave a link to their site in the description of this video. Feel free to browse what they have available there and how you might be able to use some of it in your art making process. Once again, I want to thank Eon Art Products for sponsoring this video. One of the functions of a comic book panel is to show the reader, give the reader a sense of place, where the story is taking place. Try your best to immerse the reader in that environment. It's a chance to world build with your story, and a good artist knows how to utilize those little frames on a comic book page to really let the reader kind of enter into that world easily. And Juan Guardino is one of the best artists at doing that. If you're trying to study or get better at creating establishing shots in your comic pages or just world building in general, he's definitely a great artist to study. And in this video, I wanted to try my best to focus on one of his panels, but it's almost impossible just because there's so many good ones out there. So I decided that with this video, we would look at a variety of his panels that really showcases his expertise in establishing shots and creating environments on a page, and containing it all within just single panels. A sense of place, a sense of era, a sense of time of day or night. These are all the things that he is able to get across in his panels. And he does it on top of all of that in a traditional art making way. These aren't digitally created comics. He's drawing these on paper with ink and watercolors and really bringing these worlds and these atmospheres to life right on the page. He has a background in animation. As far as I know, I think he worked for Disney at one point, and a lot of that stuff is very apparent in his comics. There's a old school kind of 2D animation feel to his comic book pages. And of course, Black Sad, the comic in which we're studying in this video, is like an anthropomorphic tale, which is very cartoony and Disney-like. Although his stories, the stories he tells in Black Sad, are not at all for children. These are very adult-themed stories, very like crime noir-related types of stories. But there's sort of like a seriousness to his pages, a kind of like dignity that he approaches these pages with. There's an artfulness, there's a real craft behind it, and in these final pages, you can really see a lot of the preliminary behind-the-scenes work that must have gone into these pages in terms of research. A lot of these stories, I think all of these Black Sad stories, they're all like period pieces. So there's like a retro quality to it. There's a consistency in terms of the type of cars that are in the backgrounds, the type of furniture, the wardrobe that the characters are wearing. All this stuff is very, very studied and informed. I think as a creator, anyone who's interested in making comics, there's a real appreciation that is very easily had when looking at this work, just because anyone who's ever done this knows just how much work goes into trying to create certain worlds and bring a story to life and make something feel believable. And he seems to do it so well and kind of like effortlessly. So I thought I would just highlight certain panels here and we could talk about one at a time. Just like I said, there's too many to just choose one and focus on one panel. So here's just a random panel that I'm pulling up that I thought was a really great example of his world building and use of also composition as well as lighting. Because he's creating these pages with ink and watercolor, these are fully painted pages and he has full control over everything from the penciling to the inking to the coloring. And so he's accounting for all of these different elements from composition to coloring to design. And this panel right here, I think, is a really great example of that. Compositionally, it's a really interesting panel because the focal point is the atmosphere itself. It's really putting the reader in this scene right here. And it's doing so in a very traditional foreground, middle ground, and background kind of way. The main characters here, the two characters that are having this dialogue, are actually very, very small, and their action is happening right in that middle ground. In the immediate foreground, we're looking past this crowd scene crossing the street. These are really just extras. If you zero in and look at each one of their faces and each one of their dress and personalities, it's almost as though each one of these could be main characters in their own story. That's how much detail and emphasis he puts into every little piece of every panel and page in his comics. But also, as far as coloring goes, they're sort of washed out in a much more like cooler tone in the foreground, underneath the shadow of presumably other buildings and street signs. And then in that middle ground and background, it's much more illuminated. There's a great use of perspective and architectural drawing. Every business and every sign seems to have its own personality, typography, really helps make the scene believable, even as cartoony as it is. It's kind of interesting because at the end of the day, these are animals dressed up as humans walking on their hind legs. But because of the seriousness that it's drawn with, it's almost an afterthought that these are like, animated animals that we're looking at. Like I said earlier, his work seems to be very informed and researched. I'm thinking that this panel right here takes place in LA in the 40s or 50s, and you could really feel that. There's a different lighting that he uses than when he's setting his stories in New York, for example. He has a completely different palette and a different lighting. All of these different attention to details when it comes to lighting and world building is probably very much informed by his background in animation. Speaking of New York, here is a page from another one of his Black Sad graphic novels. This one takes place in New York, and being a New Yorker myself, I could vouch for the authenticity of this panel. This panel takes place in Washington Square Park, and as someone who has walked through this park many times, this feels very much like Washington Park on like an autumn day. I can really feel that weather. I know that lighting. And knowing that Wano is not an American, he's drawing New York and Washington Square Park with just as much of a familiarity and a sense of understanding of it than any New York native might have. Obviously, the specific landmarks here of the structure in the background, the fountain, all of these things really clue you into the fact that this is Washington Square Park, but it's that extra layer of believability which really happens with the lighting that is displayed in this panel. It feels midday to me. I love the speckled shadowing from the leaves above. All of these little details gives this panel a real sense of space, three-dimensionality. And then what brings it alive even more is the convincingness of this particular era, which again, I think is probably the 40s or something like that. Everyone is dressed appropriately for that era. And once again, like the last panel we looked at, Black Sad, the main character of this comic, isn't drawn huge in the foreground. I really think that sometimes that is the difference between the European approach versus the American approach. The American, especially superhero approach, is to show the main character oftentimes in the foreground, drawn large, a lot of up-close faces. It's not to say that there isn't an emphasis put on the background, but I think the European approach takes the backgrounds and the environments to that next level. Oftentimes, I think prioritizing that over the heroic, bold shot of the main character. Architecture is a big part of creating any kind of world, whether it's the architecture of a busy city or a little cabin in the woods. You want to draw that architecture with as much believability and information as you can, while also bringing life into it. And this panel right here, I think, is a great example of architectural drawing done right. It doesn't feel mechanical, it doesn't feel boring. It feels like it has a lot of life to it. And it really puts you in that scene. It puts you in that world. The metaphorical camera right here is sort of above. Even from this angle, the cars are so small, you could really still get a sense of the era and the time. It doesn't feel modern. There's a great sense, once again, of coloring and lighting. I just wonder when I look at a panel like this, how long a panel like this might have taken him to draw. The European approach, I know, is a lot different than the American approach to drawing comics in terms of how long an artist is able to spend on a page. These comics aren't coming out monthly. I think they're coming out every couple of years or so. So these pages really do feel like almost like a high budget movie in a lot of ways. And the budget in this case is really the time that is spent on the pages. And it's apparent that Wano is putting in a lot of very concentrated, precious time into each one of these panels. There's so many windows, there's so many little cars, there's so many little people on this panel, but none of it feels traced. It doesn't feel photographic. It feels like a drawing, but it feels like a believable space. It feels like its own realm or reality. And I think that's one of the things that every comic artist is really trying to get across. You're not necessarily trying to mimic reality, otherwise you would just take photographs and put them into panels and display them on a page that way. You're trying to create your own reality, even if it is very informed by a specific place and a specific era. This is another overhead shot of a panel. This one might be a familiar panel for anyone who is familiar with Blacksad, or if you do a general Blacksad search on Google, this one tends to come up quite a bit. It's a beautiful panel, that's probably why, but it's another overhead shot, and it really evokes that like film noir kind of composition and moody coloring. It feels like a detective story, like the perfect establishing shot for a detective story, which it is. There's so many little details in this environment. The headline of the newspaper on his desk, all the little trinkets and knickknacks around his desk, the furniture, the chairs. These aren't like comfortable office chairs in a modern way. These are like wooden chairs. The main character, Blacksad, hunched over the desk, 1 foot up on a chair, smoking his cigarette. You can really feel that room. You could kind of feel the air and the atmosphere. You could smell the cigarette smoke. There's all these little details, like all the little finished cups of coffee that are around the shelves and the desks in the room, suggesting that he's putting in really long hours. I also love the monochrome palette in this panel as well. It really also kind of gives that film noir, black and white movie kind of vibe to it. You can hear the narration over this scene right here. And an overhead angle like this is never easy to draw. Anyone who's ever tried to draw an overhead angle like this, every object you draw, including the chair, the lamps on his desk, him himself, everything is so much harder to draw from that angle, and he seems to just do it perfectly. So that's it for this episode of Panalysis. I hope you enjoyed this look at Wano Garnido's work. Like I said, it came by popular demand. I've been wanting to make a video on his work and his Blacksad stuff. And so I thought I would ease into it by doing a Panalysis episode first. If you want to see a more in-depth video on his work, I'd love to talk more about his stuff. Let me know in the comments below. And with this episode of Panalysis, like I said, it was really hard to zero in on just one panel, but I hope these multiple panels gave you a real taste of his world building talents and his skills at creating amazing establishing shots and really creating an environment on a comic page that really brings the reader into the story. Once again, I also want to thank the sponsor of this video, Eon Art Products. There will be a link to their store in the description of this video. If you're on the market for some really great quality paper, some inks, sketch cards, they have it all. Definitely check out their shop online. Stay tuned for more episodes of this Panalysis series coming your way. If you have any questions or comments about these panels that we looked at today, definitely do leave them in the comments below. If you have some recommendations for panels that you think are worthy for me to focus on in a future episode of Panalysis, also leave those recommendations in the comments. If you'd like to see more of my stuff that I don't share on platforms like YouTube or Instagram, consider signing up to my Patreon. It's on my Patreon that I'm sharing a lot of the stuff that I'm working on in the moment, some process stuff, behind the scenes stuff. Oftentimes I'm giving early access to videos like this. So if you want to help support the channel and you also want to see a little bit extra stuff that I'm working on, consider signing up to my Patreon. Also, I'm doing portfolio reviews. I will leave the link in the description below. It is a Patreon link as well, although you don't have to be a patron to sign up for a portfolio review. I've been having a lot of fun getting to see a lot of the work that you're creating and reviewing some of your portfolios. So if you're interested in getting some of my unique feedback on your stuff, consider signing up for one of those reviews. Again, there will be a link in the description of this video for that. Other than that, that's all I got for this video. Thanks so much for watching. As always, I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.